Welcome back, and finally we're moving on to part 2. The bike is exactly how we left it in part 1, and if you recall, we're dealing with that rear shock. And finally we do have the shock free. There were a couple problems here. One, there were 2 nuts on either side that were actually welded on. They were rounded over and then someone just welded them on. Once I got those cut off, I still was unable to get the shock free. Essentially what had happened, there's a bushing that goes through the rear upper swing arm and through the shock, and that was seized to the swing arm. So what I ended up doing was, in addition to cutting off those nuts, I also had to cut the bushing from the inside on either side. So it's a hot mess. We're definitely going to have to order a new bushing and then knock this old stuff out of here. But at least we can move on with the teardown. The first thing I'm going to remove is the reservoir. There is a 10mm bolt that we need to remove. Now once I have this bolt removed, the other side just clips on. Once we remove that bracket, we can just lift the assembly up. The bottom is just held in place by this little bracket, which is attached to the frame. Just rests nicely in there. Next we'll remove this bolt and nut. Now when inspecting it, I noticed it's only finger tight, so no tools needed. As you can tell, this at one time had a cotter pin that was going through the center to help keep it in place. This is what should have been on the rear as well. Now that I have the front disconnected and the rear, my hope is to just pull this out of the back. One thing went right. Now that I have that rear shock moved out of the way, I can focus my attention to the rear wheel. Now I do have a plan of attack, and typically it's always the same. When I'm stripping down a bike, I take out the motor first. Reason being, if I took off the wheels and something came up, I can't move the bike out of the way without the wheels, and it's going to be quite heavy with just the frame and the motor. Next I move on to the rear wheel. That way if something happens, I can still maneuver the bike around with the rear wheel and the frame still attached. Once I get this removed, I'll move on to the front suspension, and then that'll be that. The first thing I need to do to remove this rear wheel is this bar here. Now what this bar does is keep the hub in place, so when you apply the brakes, it's not spinning around. The lower portion has a bolt and a nut, and there's one up at the frame as well. We're just going to remove the rear portion for now. And here's how that functions. Without that brace, this just spins. Now we're going to remove the chain. You can either cut these off, or if you're going to keep it, remove this master link. It should be very distinguishable. I'm not sure if my buddy's going to get a new chain. I believe he is, but I'm still going to remove this with the intention of saving it. Now this particular clip, it doesn't matter if you destroy it. You need to use a new one, especially on something old like this. So I'm just breaking it off. Once that is removed, I can use a small screwdriver and push out the master link. I'm not going to spend any more time on this. More than a few minutes, it needs to just be cut off. One old chain. Now I'm going to remove the rear wheel. This nut is huge. I only have one socket that will fit it, which is 1.25 inches. It's not the right size, but it oddly enough fits like a glove. So I'm not sure if this is the correct nut for this wheel, or if I'm just close enough that it is doing the trick. Now I'm going to take a punch and a hammer and knock it all the way out. Now notice I did not start hitting the end of it with the hammer because I didn't want to damage the threads or mushroom it out. Also going to remove the brake lever itself. It's not attached, but it is caught on the frame. Now here's the spacer that I pulled out on the right hand side. This could be correct. I doubt it. It seems suspicious to me that it would look like a nut. Now there are no threads. I don't know if those were just taken out and then used as a spacer, but it definitely looks suspicious. I'll have to look online and see if it's correct. Very odd. It looks like the original size that the wheel nut should have been. Oddly enough, this is about the right size, because the one I took off was humongous. Again, I mentioned 1.25 inches. This is the largest nut that I've had to remove from a dirt bike. Not a motorcycle, but an actual dirt bike. It's very, very large. So I suspect this was the original and they stripped it out and then ended up using it as a spacer. This looks more like the correct size. And now I can remove the rear swing arm. These were already loose from when I removed the engine. For this particular video, I'm going to leave the triple trees in place. I'm going to leave the front wheel attached to the fork tubes and just remove the fork tubes from the triple trees. If you're dealing with a Japanese bike, these are more than likely 12mm. And these are too tight. These do have a specific torque setting. That way you do not pinch the tubes, and I can just tell they're way too tight. And I probably know the reason why. This is not the original front end, and I was told this by a viewer. This is actually not a 1980, but a 1981. Not sure the exact differences, but I did check the VIN, and it is definitely a 1981. Also, the viewer informed me that the original bike did not have a front disc brake. And after looking at pictures, he's certainly right. So that's why the title of this video says 1981, because this is actually 1981. I was told it was a 1980. My buddy was told it was a 1980. I should have done a little bit more research, but it's definitely a 1981 with some other year front end on it. Now, I assume we're going to keep this front end, so I'm not sure about sourcing the parts. I'll have to figure out if I can figure out what bike it came off of. But it does fit pretty nicely. But loosening these bad boys up reminded me of that. So thanks a lot. I appreciate all the feedback. I need all the help I can get on this one. This is an old bike, and I know very little about it. Probably should have mentioned that at the beginning of the video, but loosening up these, good God, these triple trees reminded me. So thanks again. I appreciate it. That will make the parts hunt a little bit easier. Although I think the 1980 and the 1981 share a lot of the same parts, such as that hard to find airbox. And we get to the other side, and these are not even tight at all. So this is another reminder, if you buy a used bike, be sure to go through it. You never know what you're getting. Now, I had no intention in riding this, even if it did run, but this is a prime example of why I would not ride a bike that I know nothing about. Now I have everything loosened up. Normally I would take a screwdriver and kind of spread these out, but they feel kind of loose already, so that's probably why they were so tight. Maybe I can just lift this up. It'll kind of fall out. Essentially, I'm lifting it up and pushing it down at the same time. Ooh. There we go. Now, this is not the preferred method of doing this, but I don't feel like taking off the front wheel tonight. So, got the top out. Let's give it another yank and see if we can get the bottom. Okay, we got the entire, both forks and the front wheel out without killing anybody or hitting the camera, or even dropping the forks. They definitely need rebuilt. But essentially, minus the triple trees, we're down to the frame. We're going to take the bars off. They are also 12mm. You may notice this upper triple clamp has an odd offset. That must have been something that was maybe popular back in the day to get the bars more towards you, maybe more feeling, I'm not sure. Those threads look okay. try to remove this triple clamp. Again, this should not be this tight. Even for an old bike. Maybe if it's seized, but I have a feeling this is just over tightened. Even for an old bike, it should not be this difficult. It's just over tightened. Because now it comes off very easy, so it's definitely not seized on there. I'm certainly a backyard motorcycle guy, and I don't have any degree, and I don't necessarily know what I'm doing all the time, but I do know you need proper torque settings. Same way with this one, it's too tight. Yum. Look at that. Yeah, this was repacked not long ago. So that would explain why it was so friggin' tight. These bearings are actually probably good. Then we have one upper and lower triple clamp. Pretty much concludes this video. This is part 2 of the 1981 YZ250 teardown video. Now, it doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot more videos. We still have a lot of things to do. For one, I need to take off the spark plug and that rod from the frame. Then the frame will be completely stripped and I can give it to my buddy and he can send it off to paint, powder coat, whatever he wants to do with it. But we need to check out the parts that we do have. The thing I have to do is tear down the engine to have a look at the inside, see what's going on in there. Seems to have compression. I don't hear any grinding, anything like that. So I assume all is well. We may not have to do anything to this engine other than clean it up a bit. Now it does have this suspicious bolt on the Kickstarter. I seriously doubt that's factory. I don't even know if I can get that off. Remains to be seen. But I do need to drain the oil, take the head cylinder off, and have a look-see. Now on the rear wheel I need to inspect the brake shoes. He's going to actually take the wheels and possibly have them anodized or powder coated. He wants to do a full-on rebuild on this. Same thing with the front. Here's a pile of parts from this evening. And that big box under there is the rest of the parts that we've taken off the bike. I'm not sure if you could see under my outfeed table, using my outfeed table as a bench by the way, I have an X-carve. This is the large X-carve. I don't have any other place for it. So right now it's resting under the outfeed table. I'm unable to connect dust collection, so it makes a little bit of a mess. When I get this bike out of here, I can build a nice size table and maybe do some videos on that. I'll still do more motorcycle builds, but hopefully I'll have a little bit more room. And that'll pretty much wrap it up for this one. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to leave those below. Also, if you see any of the tools that I use in this video that you'd like to use for yourself, whether it be the hand tools or any of the woodworking tools, check out the Amazon links. They are located below the video in the description. And if you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.